Pragmatism and Pythagoras. Let's talk about Pythagoras and how he both thought well and poorly, and pragmatic thinking as defined by William James in 1907, and the three types of pragmatic thinking defined in 30 philosophers: empirical, rational, and irrational. I'm Michael Allen Prestwood, and this video explains and explores something we all do. We all think pragmatically. You, me, your family, friends, and co-workers. This video is based on the article of the same name available at touchstonetruth.com. Part 1. Pythagoras. Pythagoras was a Greek philosopher and mathematician, and for us here he is a fascinating case study in both sound and flawed thinking, as well as an interesting use case of pragmatism as defined in chapter 22. Born in 570 BCE, he lived to about age 75. He is best known for his work in geometry. The Pythagorean theorem is named after him. It describes the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. Pythagoras also explored the world of numbers. He saw patterns and relationships. He believed numbers held deep meaning. This led him to develop mystical beliefs about numbers. He saw them as more than just tools for calculation. He believed they held the secrets of the universe. Part 2. Pragmatism. Pragmatism emphasizes practicality. William James was a key figure in shaping this tradition. In his 1907 book titled Pragmatism, a new name for some old ways of thinking, he famously wrote, "The pragmatic method is primarily a method of settling metaphysical disputes, and disputes over such notions are unending. What difference would it practically make to anyone if this notion, rather than that notion, were true? If no practical difference whatever can be traced, then the alternatives mean practically the same thing, and all dispute is idle." His new look at pragmatism focuses on the usefulness of things. Pragmatists believe that the value of an idea lies in its practical applications and consequences. They prioritize the practical effects of beliefs and theories. Pragmatism asks things like, does this idea work? Does it solve a problem? Can it be applied to real-world situations? If the answer is yes, then the idea has merit. From Chapter 22. While astrology has been empirically disproven, if someone finds personal or social utility in it, such as emotional comfort, or a way to connect with others, the pragmatist might not be so quick to dismiss it as wholly irrational. It is irrational in an empirical sense, but for those that choose to believe, it might be functional in a pragmatic sense. Pragmatism values effectiveness and functionality. It cares less about abstract principles or absolute truths. Part 3. Three types of pragmatism. Pragmatism has different forms. To orient you about the types of pragmatism in my work, there are three types: empirical, rational, and irrational. The empirical pragmatist. An empirical pragmatist is someone like me, someone who is trying to live their life believing in no irrational ideas. I need evidence before I can embrace an idea as true. If the evidence is lacking, I'm generally agnostic about the idea. I don't really care one way or the other. I'm drawn to provable ideas, knowing that their exploration will transcend my own lifetime, inspiring future generations. In general, I believe in common things until proven wrong, but I also pay close attention to questioning everything, and like any skeptic, I keep an open mind to evaluating ideas. The rational pragmatist. Unlike empirical pragmatists, rational pragmatists like Pythagoras mix sound reasoning with personal beliefs. Some of those beliefs, like the divine nature of numbers, didn't stand up to scrutiny. Most people are rational pragmatists. They believe in common knowledge, but also hold on to the family's religious beliefs, especially for the unknown and unknowable. Most of my friends, and most people I know, are rational pragmatists. The irrational pragmatist. In contrast to both, the irrational pragmatist rejects even common truths, dismissing evidence outright. They frequently say things like, "There is no such thing as truth." The types of pragmatism span the way humans use evidence. Empirical pragmatists embrace common knowledge, but also insist on evidence before believing in something. Rational pragmatists also embrace common knowledge, but hold on to a few irrational beliefs despite a lack of evidence. Irrational pragmatists do not embrace common knowledge, and generally do not embrace the idea that evidence holds true value. They tend to dismiss human observations of nature in favor of something they want to believe. Let's frame the spectrum. On one end of the pragmatic spectrum, scientific inquiry is an example of empirical pragmatism. On the other end of the spectrum is the irrational pragmatist, who clings to beliefs despite contradictory evidence. Most people sit between these two extremes. Part 4, Pythagoras, a use case study in good and bad thinking. Pythagoras embodies rational pragmatism. His mathematical discoveries were groundbreaking. They were based on observation and logical reasoning. He used empirical evidence to develop his geometric theorems. However, Pythagoras also held mystical beliefs about numbers. These beliefs were not always supported by evidence. For example, he believed that certain numbers held mystical significance. He thought they could influence events in the world. Even though his mystical ideas were not intellectually accurate, they had pragmatic value because they inspired real advancements. This makes Pythagoras an example of a rational pragmatist in action. His beliefs blended rational thought and mystical conviction, and whether they were true mattered less than whether they produced real-world effects. Pythagoras is a good and ancient example of how our personal convictions influence our thinking. He held on to some beliefs but still embraced common knowledge and observation. The enduring legacy of Pythagoras. Pythagoras wasn't just a mathematician. He was a philosopher, mystic, and teacher. His contributions to geometry, music, and astronomy helped to forge the groundwork for modern science. 1. Mathematics, the Pythagorean theorem. It is fundamental in geometry, trigonometry, and physics, and forms the basis of Euclidean geometry and is widely used in engineering, architecture, and navigation. While the theorem was known to Babylonians centuries earlier, it is Pythagoras who is credited with proving it. 2. Mathematical ratios and music theory. Pythagoras discovered that musical notes correspond to simple numerical ratios. For example, 2 to 1 for an octave. 3. The philosophy of math. He introduced odd versus even numbers and was the first to classify numbers as perfect, deficient, or abundant. His classification of perfect numbers led to the idea of prime numbers. 4. Astronomy, spherical Earth. Pythagoras proposed that the Earth is a sphere and not flat. Later thinkers like Aristotle provided empirical evidence for a spherical Earth. 5. Academia, the Pythagorean Brotherhood and early scientific thought. The Pythagorean Brotherhood functioned like an early academic institution, blending mathematics, philosophy, and mysticism. They introduced proof-based reasoning, influencing later Greek mathematicians like Euclid and Archimedes. They promoted systematic reasoning over superstition, which paved the way for Plato, Aristotle, and the development of Western logic. The legacy of Pythagoras reminds us that even brilliant minds can hold flawed beliefs, and his story echoed into the future as a seminal example of holistic eudaimonia. Today, we still grapple with the tension between reason and belief. We see this in debates about science, religion, and politics. Understanding the spectrum of pragmatism helps us navigate these complex issues. This content was drawn from my book, 30 Philosophers. For a deep dive on the 3 types of pragmatic thinking and how it influences you and your friends, read Chapter 22. I hope you enjoyed this video from my Touchstone Truth channel. Please like and subscribe. For more pragmatic information on philosophy, science, critical thinking, and history, visit touchstonetruth.com.